Well, pleased to see a good turnout this afternoon, as good as the weather is. Sometimes you want it to rain, and be miserable outside. Now, we're especially pleased that our speaker for this Sunday is a fellow named Darin Waters. You may have heard Darin. He's a visiting assistant professor of history at the University of North Carolina at Asheville. He grew up in the Shiloh neighborhood of Asheville, and he received his bachelor's degree at Liberty University in Virginia, Lynchburg. He earned a Master of Arts at North Carolina State. He wasn't finished with North Carolina, so he earned his PhD at Chapel Hill. And at UNCA, he teaches courses in United States and Latin American history, North Carolina history, United States constitutional history, African American history, and Southern Appalachian history. There's a theme in there. His dissertation was called Life Beneath the Veneer. Examines the formation and development of Asheville's African American community following the Civil War and Emancipation. Mother would have loved that title, Life Beneath the Veneer. She understood that there's about this much going on that's visible and about this much going on that's underground. Past talks that Dr. Waters has given in the Asheville area, and Ann and I have heard a few of them, they include slavery in western North Carolina and a talk called Barely Seen and Rarely Heard, Political Invisibility of Asheville's Black Community, 1865 to 1900. And he's most recently begun to explore issues surrounding Thomas Wolfe and his views of race and his evolving thinking about race. So it's my pleasure to introduce, talking on Wilma Dykeman as journalist, Dr. Darin Waters.
Thank you, Jim. I really appreciate that introduction. And I'm going to try to talk into the microphone. I have a hard time with these things. And I'm not quite blessed with my father's voice. My father is, my department chair is back here. A few people have met my dad. My father is a minister, so he's been blessed with that very commanding voice. I was not blessed with that, so I will try to speak into, as Senator Thurman said, the machine. I'll try to speak into the machine. I'm here, it's an honor for me to be here to talk on Wilma Dykeman. It's been a pleasure to get to know her son and her daughter-in-law, but I'm also here, as I just told my department chair just a few minutes ago, I'm here to try and not embarrass the University of North Carolina at Asheville. So I will do my best and not to embarrass the history department. But I took the time as I was preparing for this talk to look at the website for the Wilma Dykeman legacy. I'd had a number of conversations with Jim about his mother, but I did take the time to look at the website and to look at the mission of the Wilma Dykeman legacy. And I have a deep appreciation for the work of the Wilma Dykeman legacy. And it is spelled out on the website for those who haven't had a chance to take a look at that. And I just wanted to just briefly mention, what it says there. This is a great mission of what they are designed and instituted to do. And it is especially to perpetuate her belief in the need to extend respect to every individual, regardless of predicament, entitlement, or circumstance. That is, I think, a very noble mission, especially in today's world. In many ways, I have to point out that talking about Wilma Dykeman is new territory for me. As some of you may know, I had the distinct pleasure while I was working through my PhD at Chapel Hill, for a brief time at least, to work with Dr. John Hope Franklin. I had known Dr. Franklin for many years, and then when I started the process of trying to decide what I was going to do for a dissertation topic, my dissertation chair, who was Dr. Harry Watson, at the time he was the director of the Center for the Study of the American South, told me, he said, Dr. Franklin calls every now and then to check and see how you're doing over here. So he said, you really should go see him. And so when I went over to see him, to visit him at his home, Dr. Watson also put me up to asking him to sit on my dissertation committee. And I'm thinking at the time he was retired, he was 92 years old. I'm thinking he's never going to do this. But to my surprise, he agreed to do it, which made the relationship even more interesting because as I tell these stories about Dr. Franklin, I used to take my kids over to his house with me. He loved my boys. He watched them grow up. He's like a grandparent to my two sons. And I would take them there to be a buffer between me and him. In the event that I might say something stupid, untoward, he might not call me on it because my kids were there. But that never worked. That never worked. But I do remember Dr. Franklin mentioning Wilma Dykeman's name to me. We didn't talk at length about her, but he did mention the name, especially and it came up in the context of what I wanted to do for a dissertation topic. As Jim told you, I was born and raised here in Asheville. I'm one of those rare birds. I was born and raised here. I have just one leg up on Dr. Pierce, who was here the last time to speak to you. He wasn't born here, I was, but we both grew up here. So I've got one leg up on him on this. But I left in 1985, and I've always said, jokingly, I hit the first train moving out of Asheville, and for various reasons. I think my work, in my work I've explored this issue, especially with the African-American community. So I left in 1985, and just briefly, I have to say this, Jim was talking about all of the universities that I went to. I remember talking to one of my kids one time about my college experience, and I think it was the youngest son when he was real small. By this time I was at UNC Chapel Hill, and he just said, "Dad, wow, you've been to a lot of schools." I was like, "Yeah, I have." So it was one school after another. But once I got to Chapel Hill, my parents said to me, they said, "You finally ended up at the right place," so. But anyway, Dr. Franklin did mention Wilma Dykeman's name because he was the one person on my dissertation committee who told me, he told the rest of the committee, this was after I had defended my dissertation proposal, which was a little controversial. It was controversial in the sense that there was a belief among some on the committee that I would never be able to do this study of Asheville, that I wouldn't be able to find, especially of the African-American community in Asheville, I wouldn't find enough resources by which to do the study. So they had me propose, my dissertation chair had me propose a study that would look at all of Western North Carolina. And I always say I had no disrespect to what is going on in these other counties, McDowell County and Burke County. I really wanted to study Asheville. And Dr. Franklin was the one person, after I had defended and they had approved to let me do the study, Dr. Franklin, he said, "It is my conclusion, just let him do what he wants to do." I was like, yeah, that's exactly what we should do. But he did talk about, he did mention Wilma Dykeman's name. But in the course of doing my dissertation, I did not take the time at that moment to really look at her work. I wish I had, but in one way, I'm glad that I didn't. I mean, my objective by the time I started the dissertation was to finish it, because I felt like I felt like I had been in this process for forever, and I had to get it over with. So I wasn't really all that interested in having anybody tell me, well, you need to read another book. I was like, no more books. But the objective was to finish the dissertation. I'm glad that I didn't encounter the work until late, because I do believe that Wilma Dykeman's work will bring a new dimension to the process that I'm going through now to rework the dissertation for publication as a book. And I think it will add a new dimension to that. So I can at least say that I will be doing something different in the dissertation than I did in the book than I did in the dissertation. As I've said, I had the opportunity to meet Jim Stokely, and that has been a very rewarding relationship for me. And it has only increased my interest in Wilma Dykeman. What I find what I really appreciate about her the most is her love for this region, her love and her appreciation for the region of Western North Carolina and just of the mountains. Like me, she was born here in Asheville, so I share that in common with her. But what I have gathered from reading some of her material, some of her work, and what I've heard others say about her, is that she had an appreciation of this region very early. Jim and I talked about this on the phone, and I told him, I said, I find it very curious to me because I don't feel that I had that appreciation for the region early. It's come late in my life. And I do wonder why. It might have something to do with family dynamics and a combination of things. We did talk about that. But my appreciation for these mountains has really grown over time, which is interesting because I remember bringing my sons here years ago. We were driving, I think, on Patton Avenue, headed out towards West Asheville, where my grandparents lived. And my oldest son was looking at the vista, the mountains. And I remember sitting on my grandparents' porch with them. They lived right on Fayetteville Street, and you could watch. And we would sit on the porch with them, watch the rain come in from the west sometimes. Now, I have a deep appreciation for this now, whereas I didn't when I was growing up. But I remember my son saying to me, Dad, he said, boy, did you really enjoy living up here? It's just beautiful here. And that really just struck a chord with me, that no, I didn't. There was no real appreciation for it. So I really marvel at the fact that Wilma Dykeman had such a deep appreciation for the beauty of this region early in her life. And her appreciation of that, I believe, fueled her journalistic activities, and it helped. And she helped in many ways, I think, define what so many of us know about this region that we call Southern Appalachia. And she helped define it in a very positive way. And I think that that is important. Now, this is interesting too, because talking about the Appalachian identity, and I've said this before, I am not really sure I've ever heard the word. And I probably did, but this just has something to say about me as a student when I was growing up, that I wasn't the most astute student in the bunch. My mom is still trying to figure out how it is that I would go on after leaving here to get a PhD. She always says, I couldn't get you to do anything when you were in high school or, coming up through secondary school. But did I ever hear this word Appalachia? I can't remember if I did. So as a child growing up, no, I'm not really sure. I do remember hearing family members who were in California. I spent most of my time, and this is connected to the fact that Wilma Dykeman has helped to really define a very positive image of Southern Appalachia. But my family members that lived in California, I've spent most of my time trying to convince them that I grew up in a region where we had running water and indoor bathrooms. They were constantly telling me, didn't you, wasn't that where Deliverance was filmed, in the mountains? It's like, no, I live in a city. As you already know, Wilma Dykeman was the author of many books, essays, and they were widely published throughout the country. Her prolific output is absolutely astonishing to me. Hers, Dr. Franklin's, and another one of my intellectual mentors was a guy from a scholar from Ireland, Conor Cruz O'Brien, and they were just very prolific. So her prolific output is very astonishing to me. I think I could only hope to be able to produce this much material. And in an article honoring his mother, I read your article on your mother, Jim. Jim noted that while there's a lot of talk today about the impossibility of trying to wear the hat of supermom, his mother in many ways was just that. Which I find I would agree, given the fact that she raised two kids, doing, and writing at the same time. She gave an interview, and some of you I may be saying things that you all already know, but I had to do a little bit of research to prepare for today, so I've been reading a lot of things. But she gave an interview, and she told the funniest story. And Jim, I don't know if it was you or your brother that she was talking about, because she didn't specify in the article. Okay. But she made the point that she had spent so much time writing, and you all spent so much time traveling across as she was writing it, that one of the two children at one point to the grandmother told her, it was sitting around the stacks and stacks of books. Was this you, Jim? Okay. Stacks and stacks of books. And I guess the grandmother asked what he was doing, and he said, I'm writing about the Pigeon River. That was your brother. This was just one of those stories, it just stood out to me because I thought about it wasn't that I was being prolific, I was just trying to find my way through the process of graduate school. And when I started my master's degree, my oldest son was born. And so he went everywhere with me, carrying him in the seat when I had to go in to see professors. By the time, I was finishing that process, he was up and walking. And I remember being in the D.H. Hill Library in Raleigh. And he's carrying his little notepad with him as we're kind of going up to find some books. And someone there was asking him, he bent down and said, well, what are you up to, little fella? And he said, I'm writing my paper. So kind of similar story. So this is pretty much all that Jonathan knew. But this was a great story. And I think about how prolific a writer she was. And it makes me feel kind of small in many ways in the face of this towering figure, especially because getting the PhD for me was hard enough. And I'm of the opinion that when we look at Wilma Dykeman and how prolific she was and so much material that she produced, that it was her passion. It was her passion that enabled her to be so productive over the course of her lifetime. Reading about her, and especially in her own words, in interviews she gave, makes me really wish that I had known her. I took the time to actually watch a lecture that she gave in 2001, shortly after 9/11. And I'll mention that again in just a few minutes. But, and just watching her, this very genteel lady, it made me really wish that I had had the opportunity to actually know her personally. Dan Pierce was here, Dr. Pierce was here last week, and so this kind of puts me in a very difficult situation because following him is very difficult to do. And I'm sure that he just dazzled you all, and he, unlike me, had the opportunity to know Wilma Dykeman. In fact, he shared a picture with me not too long ago of him with Wilma Dykeman and John Hope Franklin. So, again, it puts Dan Pierce in a very different category from me. Now, the one thing that I've noticed about her in the interviews that she did, and even in the lectures that she gave, and in many ways it reminds me of my experiences with Dr. Franklin, of her humility. I mean, Dr. Franklin, as many of you know, towering figure in the historical profession, but one of the most humble men that I had ever known. The fact that he would take the time to work with me the way he did just amazed me. And I'm amazed, when I was looking at one of the lectures that Wilma Dykeman gave, just how humble she was. And actually, she made this point. I'm thinking this is the woman who wrote The Tall Woman, all of these many books, neither black or white, but she, in 2001, in that lecture she gave at AB Tech, actually made the statement, I'm not sure that I can say anything that will really make a difference here or will be profound. She said, but I'm here anyway. And I find that humility is something that I think so many of us could really benefit from. So I really appreciate that. She talked about the power of the humanities in that lecture, and I want to couch this, talking about her as a journalist, in the terms of the humanities. And in that, she talked about how the humanities were a very important field of study for us, and how even in the face of 9/11 in 2001, she said that it would be the humanities that would help us through that very difficult process. She talked about how it had changed us. This event would have changed us in many ways. And it really did. It still affects us to this day. I talk in my classes sometimes about how 9/11 really impacted our democratic structure of government. And I think many of you who have probably heard, Cornel West will be coming here on October 16th, and I think in his book, Democracy Matters, he deals a bit with this, about how this one particular event changed us in so many ways. But she talked about how the humanities would play a major role in helping us through this process. And in what she said, she kind of echoed the sentiments, I believe, of another person who, I have a lot of respect for his work as well. And I want to take the moment here just to read a few words of what he had to say in his speech. But she echoed, Dick Broadhead would echo her years later. He's the president of Duke University. And he had this to say about the humanities. He said, the humanities are not just the subjects listed in college catalogs, literature, philosophy, history, music, and other arts. Those are certainly included. The humanities are the name for the process by which all things human are made, said, thought, and done come back to spark the understandings of other humans across time. Two facts make this transaction possible, he said. The first is that humans make things, express themselves through materials that surround them, and that these wrought things, which could be a tool, a house, a picture, a song, an expressed idea, live on when their fashioners have departed. Faulkner, he's quoting Faulkner here, Faulkner said that the work of art is the artist's way of scribbling. Kilroy was here on the walls of that final and irrevocable oblivion through which we must someday pass. But it isn't only art objects that have this trick of persistence, he said. The idea of representative government was envisioned once upon a time by people who have long since left the scene. In Faulkner's Requiem for a Nun, Broadhead pointed out the most everyday mark made by the homeliest, the most everyday mark made by the homeliest of figures, the name of a country wife carved in a window pane, announces the fact of her human existence. She's saying, he says, listen, stranger, this was myself, this was I. And he goes on to say, second, as we make things that outlive their makers, another of our innate capacities is that we go out in spirit towards the work of others. Humans have the peculiar ability, and judging, he said, by the amount of time we spend reading, watching videos, listening to music, arguably even human beings even have a fundamental need to exit the confines of our own experience and to take up mental residency in spaces created by others. Put these two things together, he said, and you get the difference that the humanities make. This gift for going out of ourselves and entering into things is what gives fresh being to creations whose origins are distant in space and time. I really believe that. And I believe that really, in many ways, this kind of encapsulates much of Wilma Dykeman's work.